Greetings, friends. You are on the Military Reports channel. And today we will discuss with you the situation in Ukraine on the 7th of June, 2024 year. A lot of things have happened today, so let's get started. And we will start with you with a missile strike, a drone strike that was carried out on the territory of Ukraine last night and early in the morning. According to this map, we can observe with you the main trajectories, flight routes of both cruise missiles and drones. And today, according to the incoming information, according to the data that are already publicly available, the enemy of the Russian aerospace forces has inflicted a major blow to the energy infrastructure. For example, several frames were published in a day, all essentially from the same place. In these frames, we can observe with you, let's say, how the oil storage facility is burning in the area of the village of Grebenki. In other words, it was one of those objects that was hit by the Russian aerospace forces over the past day. Then we are moving with you to the Kharkiv direction, from where very interesting information comes. I remind you that over the past few days, we have mostly talked about only one thing, as say. According to the official channel of the North Group of Troops, we have read repeatedly that first the armed forces of Ukraine are planning and preparing for a counterattack, regrouping, bringing additional fresh forces from newly mobilized soldiers, but mobilized people. And then the news came that Ukraine was regrouping and entering the line of counterstrike. And in fact, today, on the 7th of June, we began to receive the first reports, the first information about the beginning of the Ukrainian counteroffensive. The information is very contradictory. Some sources have contradictions with other sources, so we need to cover as much as possible today and understand what is really happening in the Kharkiv direction. If we follow the report of the North Group of Forces, then according to them, according to their report, the armed forces of the Russian Federation continue fighting in the area of the aggregate plant. Several buildings have been taken under control and, as it were, the assault operations continue. And also according to the same report, no changes were noted in the Citadel area. The citadel of the central part of northern Volchansk is under the full control of the VSO units. If we talk about the eastern and northeastern parts, then according to the report of the North Group of Troops, Russian units continue to advance in this direction, and the overall advance is around 300 meters. In general, the fighting continues according to the grouping of troops north. However, there is a very important point to pay attention to. Also, according to this report, over the past day, during the 6th of June, Russian units took a number of offensive actions in the direction of the Green, and during this attack, a forest field came under the control of Russian units. Most likely it is. And, let's say, the attack was unexpected, the attack was lightning fast. In general, the APU did not have time to bring reinforcements here, and therefore were forced to retreat, or in general, the battle was completely, let's say, lost. However, again in the same report, it is worth paying attention to the following paragraph, which comes after the general statistics on losses. In all directions, the AFU has increased the intensity of artillery attacks on Russian positions, mainly from mortars, and intelligence activities have intensified. This suggests that in the near future, the troops of the Kiev, Ukrainian armed forces, intend to launch a counteroffensive. In other words, this report was published this morning, and this report was about what happened on the 6th of June. But on the 7th of June, the first geolocations began to arrive. We'll start with these geolocations. And we will start with you from the settlement of Gluboko. If you remember, during, say, the first days of the offensive, Russian units managed to drop into the Liptsovsky recoils. And even we have kept this territory in a gray zone for quite a long time. We did not have specific information about whether the Russian units managed to gain a foothold, take control and so on, so on, so on. We were kept in a gray area, waiting for some geolocation that could help us adjust the map. And today geolocations were received, but geolocation today comes from the settlement of Glubokaya. I think all of you have seen this footage. Pay attention from the left corner, the left, the rightmost left corner. Here is a small fire point. This is a Ukrainian Bradley, who drove up to the settlement of Glubokaya point blank and straight from a distance. Shoots the settlement from a short distance, inflicting fire damage on the units of the Russian army in the settlement. In other words, This is the first evidence, the delegated evidence that, first of all, the Liptsovsky Dachas are under the full control of the divisions of Ukraine. And this is also the first evidence that the Ukrainians are still cautiously, slowly, without any additional gestures, gradually beginning to probe the defense of the units of the Russian Federation in the area of the settlement of Glubokaya. That is, if we go back to the map with you, then most likely Bradley drove along the canal, along a small forest belt here. And from this position he struck at the units of the Russian army in the locality. That is, based on this map, we have updated the area, increased a small gray zone, painted over the control of Ukrainian units. Also the universal Dachas. In other words, the offensive has begun. Fighting is already underway in Gluboko, an important locality. And I am also sure that these forests are currently being observed along the line of Lipetsk in a similar story. Perhaps there are also fierce fighting clashes going on here. So far there are simply no geolocations confirming this. Then we will move on to Volchansk again. Again we will return to this story, to the northern part. Let's say we listened to the Russian version, looked at it, and read the official report. Now let's go back to geolocations. According to geolocations, we have an interesting geolocation, which was published by Akhmat, let's say. The Barbarian Squad is the Dranovati, Akhmat Special Forces. And in these frames, we can observe with you how additional reconnaissance activities are being conducted, and fire damage. Artillery strikes, mortar strikes are being inflicted on the positions of the armed forces of Ukraine. In the area of the southern part of Severny Volchansk, a large number of strikes have been inflicted, but in general they are all clustered in the same area, in the same places, among the same ruins, the same buildings. And if we sum up and more or less distribute all the geolocations, all the blows that were inflicted, and put them on the map, then we will be surprised. So for example, let's look at the map. Here is one place where blows were struck. Here is another place where blows were struck. Here is another place that was struck. And all these are the positions of the armed forces of Ukraine. I remind you that yesterday, according to the previous configuration of the map, this quarter was under the control of a subdivision of the Russian Federation, and from this quarter strikes were carried out on the aggregate plant. In particular, according to geolocation, which were published a month ago, well, not a month ago, 2 or 3 weeks ago, Russian units established full control over the Volchansk police department. And today we see that artillery strikes are already being carried out on these positions. And definitely this is a fresh video. The freshness of this video is evidenced primarily by the ruins and the completely destroyed city. In other words, it is clearly unambiguously clear that every building has already been almost destroyed. This is very, very fresh footage. Plus, in general, we started receiving geolocation shots and drone strikes from the Varvara, Akhmat, and Special Forces squad. Only from yesterday, in fact. In other words, these are fresh personnel, and the unit was transferred to the direction very, very recently. That is, based on what we see, if we summarize everything with you, then we can summarize and say with some degree of confidence that during the counteroffensive in the Volchansk area, the APU regained control over at least this quarter, and, in fact, on the contrary, expanded the control zone, let's say, in the area aggregate plant. Of course, we need more information to confirm this information. It's generally in the whole configuration. But let's summarize all the news once again. We see with you that there are counteroffensives along the line of Lipetsk, Deep Lipetsk-Lukyansk, and, let's say, Yuzhnoye, in the direction of Yuzhny Severny Volchansk. There are some news on the Sumy region. Today, information was published that Ukrainians are planning to expand the evacuation zone along the border, to create a sanitary zone for another 10 kilometers. Where exactly this will happen is unclear. Then in the sum, it is so stretched along the border, perhaps anywhere. But if we talk about geolocations, then the main focus, let's say, since the beginning of the same June, we have been observing it in this direction. Right here. And let me remind you that a Russian column was broken up here at the beginning of the month. Also, in the area of the settlement of Sudza, we can observe with you, and have observed with you how Ukrainian drones destroyed, say, an electric train in Beer, most likely, which was used for transferring cargo. In the area of the same Suya, footage of a strike on, let's say, a substation is published. And here we can observe the work of Ukrainian operators in the area of the settlement of Uspinovka. In other words, if we summarize all these geolocation news and exactly where the specific largest number of geolocations comes from, then just simple mathematics can assume that it is here in this direction, it is on this, let's say, a small ledge, that Russian units are currently concentrated. And it is on this ledge that these are Vasilovka, Belovody, Basovka, Loknya, Unikivka. It is in this direction that the offensive of Russian units is planned. That is, in fact, along the shortest path towards the settlement of the Sum. That is, it is possible to go straight to the amounts in the forest belts and hear already from the forest. To keep the amounts under some kind of control, that is, most likely, it is possible that a strike will be carried out here. If it is carried out in the direction of the settlement of Suma, then we are moving with you to the Kopinski direction, firm where interesting information also comes. Russian units have been trying to do a typical new settlement of the north 4 days. And on the whole, the offensive is progressing quite successfully. Western pro-Ukrainian cartographers note the promotion of Russian units confirms it. Several frames were published today. Approximately in these pictures, we can observe with you an attempt to storm Russian units. However, during the offensive, the Russian Beha ran into a minefield, and the Beha was hit. After which the Russian soldiers left the car, began to retreat so as not to fall, perhaps under some kind of blow from the AFU. A little to the south along the road, on the basis of the Stepovanovo-Salovkivinovka road, mine clearance activities are being carried out. In these frames, we can observe with you a Russian drone that has stumbled upon another barrier, a minefield, a line is standing. And an attempt to clear mines begins. And after the mine clearance, we see with you a huge explosion, a large detonation. In other words, we see with you that there is still preparation going on. There is a lot of work to be done before the advanced units can enter the settlement. But in general, the work is underway. And most likely, there is no need to wait until the end of August. In the coming week, for sure, Russian units will enter Stepovaya Novoselka. And the armed forces units will be forced to roll back from this settlement in the direction of the town village of Peshanaya. Footage is also published confirming objective control over the condition of crossings. The condition of bridges in the area of Aki Oskola. We see with you that the bridge has been completely destroyed. Perhaps in this state, it will already be quite difficult for Ukrainians to restore it. And it is unlikely that anyone will take it up now during such a serious offensive, which is being carried out by units of the Russian Federation. There has been no news in the area of Stilmakovka for the last day. This is the first time since the beginning of the mention in the summaries of this direction. Here it is in 2 weeks, in my opinion, it says something every day. Not even a single mortar strike has been published today. Then we are moving with you to the area of Thorns. Just before the start of filming this video, information began to arrive that Russian units resumed the offensive along the Yampolov-Katerny-Torskoy-Novosadovo line and managed to expand the control zone in all these forests. Perhaps with the exception of the Mittens. There is no geolocation or footage yet. Everything is mainly based on some rumors and transmitted information, but most likely this information will be confirmed. And perhaps tomorrow we will discuss it in detail. Then we are moving with you to the Seversk direction. The settlement is disputed. Once again. Another day, another batch of drone strikes, the destruction of everything that can be destroyed. But again, there is no operation on the ground yet. But again, based on that focus, if we increase the number of updates with you from the 1st of May, then there simply is not a single living square centimeter, which would not be struck by units of the Russian army. Here are farms, here are residential buildings. Everything is simply destroyed here. Here it was decided to simply erase the settlement from the face of the earth. Maybe then just go in and take control of the ruins. Absolutely the same situation. We could observe the settlement of Kleshivka with you. That is, well, everything is clear in a controversial way. It is only a matter of time when there will already be an understanding of the Russian command. That it is possible to enter with minimal losses to move further in the direction of Ivan Davka. According to Razdalovka, another source, Marit Karelin, let's say, confirms that Russian units really managed to break through the defense in the USU northeastern, eastern Razdalovka. So far, again, there are no geolocations confirming this information, but if we summarize, then according to his information, Russian units also approximately control such a part, entering a semicircle on the very settlement of Razdalovka. And, of course, with such a configuration, we repeat, as last time when we talked about this direction. The heights will be forced to roll back sooner or later. Next, we are moving with you to the watch direction. Today, more or less some interesting information has been received, which more or less reveals the whole situation on what is happening in this area. And we still do not have any information about the status of, let's say, the bridgehead of Russian units on the Ukrainian side of the Seversky Donetsk-Donbass Canal. We remember that video when the troops landed on Bek, took the trenches, after that silence, complete silence. And everyone, of course, was wondering what was going on there, because it was definitely unlikely that they came there to drink coffee. There were military operations, there are counterattacks of the Afu country, and it is unclear how it all ended. The fog has cleared up a bit today. It turns out that very important information has been received today from Russian sources, or rather, to be precise, from units, from soldiers of the 93rd Mechanized Brigade, which in fact is responsible for the north of Kalinovka, for the forest belts in the direction of Grigorovka, and there further, yes, perhaps to the nut of Vasilevka. These are completely their phase, and there, as we say, a line from the zone of responsibility. I do not report that the Russian units managed to advance, let's say, to the northeast during the next assault operation. From the northeastern to the northern part, let's say, in the direction of the north from Kalinovka and further along the forest belt, to enter Kalinovka from the north. In other words, this is the maneuver that was carried out. Certainly not in one day. It was an operation designed for several days. Gradually we moved along the forest belt, apparently with you drone strikes in Podronami a little from the north in the area of Grigorovka. You most likely tried to transfer reinforcements in order to stabilize, but all this was detected, destroyed, and, in general, it was not possible to stop the advance of Russian units. And with approximately such a picture, let's say now Russian units are anchored in Kalinovka from the north. The APU, in turn, is trying to unblock this area and get out of the encirclement. Footage of the move will be published. Here was an attempt to possibly evacuate the northern farms with the use of Bradley, but it was not possible to do this. Bradley was shot down, as a result abandoned, and later also finished off destroyed by Russian drones. A little to the south we see separate units. Separately, the soldiers of the armed forces of Ukraine are trying to pass from north to south to occupy some positions. But they are immediately attacked. That is, there were attempts, perhaps initially from the farms, to go, say, to the south, and cut the grouping of Russian units into two parts, after which they dealt with the one that is located in the west of Kalinovka. However, this could not be done, and as a result, the AFU units themselves, located in farms, were surrounded from all sides already. In other words, such information is received in this direction. Based on these, of course, these news, we can conclude that in the near future, the story of Kalinovka will end. Further subdivision is noted. Further promotion of Russian units, and in fact in Yara. Today, the APU published footage of drone strikes on this part of garages. Here are these shots, published by the official, let's say, 41st Separate Mechanized Brigade Personnel 41st. And now blows are being struck, rap work, an attempt to drown out, but the blows still reach. And this first of all confirms exactly that the bridgehead is gradually expanding, and despite the difficulties, the speed. The battles are gradually moving to the central, and then, of course, to the western outskirts of the western-eastern Volchansk. Of the interesting information, it is also worth noting the footage published by Ukrainians. In these frames, we see a pipe, and this is essentially a pipe, where the Seversky Donetsk-Donbass Canal goes above ground. Not on the ground, not underground, but above the ground, through pipes, flowing from one part, let's say, of the channel to another. And in these frames, according to the author of this video, it is claimed that the Russian unit took control of the channel. The pipe is wide enough, and it is along the pipe that the defense line is currently being organized, either the offensive line, or a further springboard for the offensive. Very convenient, let's say, positions. And this channel, this turns out, the pipe is completely under the control of Russian units. We have completely painted the territory. We have concrete evidence of this promotion. That's all, the map is already fully colored here, and this in turn also confirms that there were probably attempts to move on, say, to the Ukrainian side, but so far it is not clear to us about the results of this promotion. A little to the south of Ivanovo, Russian units are trying to storm the remaining, the last, so to speak, the largest stronghold located in these forests, and this is, let's say, the last such fortified area, the capture of which may even speed up the process of cleaning up the entire, let's say, the left bank of the canal as much as possible. But the attack was very interesting. In the footage, we see artillery training first. Russian gunners strike at the forest with the use of multiple rocket launchers, simple artillery installations, mortars. Well, that is, we see with you that they are working closely. After the final one, after the artillery preparation was completed, the Stirlandings were already launched into battle. Amphibious assault troops, who moved mainly on BES. And now we see with you the very advance, the very attempt of the assault. Several vehicles, infantry fighting vehicles, are moving at high speed in the direction of this forest, under the blows of artillery installations of Ukrainian units. However, just before the very forest, for some reason, all the equipment just makes a circle, a ring, and turns back. That is, if we go back to the map, then in general, artillery strikes were first inflicted on this part of the forest, after which the Russian, let's say, paratroopers moved along this route, reached this forest belt, turns out to the west, drove here, made a small loop here, and returned to their original positions again without losing not a single soldier, not a single piece of equipment. It is difficult to say what this case is for, but most likely it was a reconnaissance by combat, in order to identify the main artillery positions of the IFU unit, which after this attack, of course, began to be processed, and already during the counter-battery struggle from the Russian side. In other words, such an interesting maneuver was carried out today south of Ivanovo. Then we are moving with you to the Avdiivka direction, where we continue to receive information about the fighting in the area of the village of Sokol. Ukrainian units continue to suffer heavy losses among the material. Let's say another Bradley was destroyed in the course of either a drone strike, or an anti-tank strike, or another strike, let's say, by a Russian tank. A little to the west, another piece of equipment was destroyed. In these frames, Abrams is destroyed, or rather Leopard 2-5, which he was destroyed in my opinion, with the use of perhaps even Krasnopol. Here is the blow itself, then detonation, and destroy the explosion of the bull. In other words, the assault operations continue. The Falcon is also being mined. The APU regularly tries to counterattack Russian positions through the Falcon, again with the same delusions, the same piece of equipment. However, using the remote sensing method, all approaches, all roads from the Falcon itself are mined, and therefore, as soon as some kind of car appears here, and there is a high probability that it will simply blow up on Russian-placed mines. That is, the Falcon is being stormed, so far without any obvious progress on the ground, but this is in fact not far off. Interesting shots appeared today from Novaya Alexandrovka. Most cartographers in general are already continuing to color. As I understand it, the Russian division of Arbat is working in this direction. And now the footage of artillery strikes on the settlement is being published, and some of these artillery strikes fall on the territory painted over in red, which most likely confirms that for a while the Russian units rolled back Alexandrovka again, since the IFU may have rolled up fresh forces, and now work is underway on them. Perhaps after, let's say, the artillery processing, there will be attempts to enter the settlement itself again. According to Human, there is no tile. Krasnogorovka nickname is nothing important. Artillery strike, striking, and nothing more. And then we move Konstantinovka Novomikhailovka. The 238th Guards Artillery Brigade continues to work here, which does not give a day's rest to Ukrainian units. Every day, the public publishes up to 10, or even more, their in geolocation shots of the destruction of another howitzer, another artillery installation, another warehouse, another gun there, another tank shooting from a closed firing position there. In other words, in general, the fields are processed as tightly as possible. Here it's even just again for clarity, so that it never goes out of memory from the 1st May, in fact, in a little over a month. We see perhaps about 100 cases of artillery equipment hit, or just equipment in the forest, or a warehouse in these fields. The APU is suffering catastrophic losses here, which of course also affects the positive progress of Russian units along the Novomykhailovka-Konstantinovka line. Today, the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation confirmed that during the fighting, the settlement of Proskoveka was finally taken under the control of Russian units. We have this information as a whole. Yesterday it was still, or the day before yesterday, and the pose of the day before yesterday was confirmed by the soldiers of the 79th Brigade of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. They still claim that they are holding perhaps the westernmost outskirts, perhaps this forest field. It is difficult to say where the advanced positions of the 79th are now, but in general their posts do not end there. Of interest, it is also worth noting that the 79 assures and confirms that fighting is currently underway on the southeastern outskirts of Konstantinovka. Again, we do not have personnel, but for some reason I am inclined to trust this information, and according to the incoming news, it can be assumed that very serious battles are being fought here now. Russian troops are fighting for a foothold in the settlement itself. In Jesus, they are essentially fighting for the whole direction. In the event of the fall of Konstantinovka, a lot can float here and change geographically as much as possible. Also today, very interesting information was received again from the 79. They report that literally 7 kilometers to the south, 7 kilometers to the south, there are extremely high risks of losing Road 0524 and the complete seizure of this part of 7 kilometers to the south by Russian units. If we count 7 kilometers on the map to understand what point we are talking about, if we are talking with you, let's say, from the outskirts, the southern outskirts of Paraskovevka, then 7 kilometers so that you understand. This is this intersection. This is the intersection between the settlements of Vodian, Uglidar, Sweet, and Konstantinovka. And according to the 179th Brigade of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Russian units are currently conducting assault operations in the direction of this company stronghold. There is an extremely high probability that new, let's say updates, new personnel will appear in the near future. And there is an extremely high probability that in the next few days, Russian units will take control of this stronghold, and, in the event of a fall of this stronghold, they will be located at the intersection of the most important logistics routes. Well, I think that next, but it will be very sad. It will be very scary, very sad, and it will be unclear what. It is even difficult to predict here. It is even difficult to predict exactly where the APU will be able to stop the Russian offensive in the event of entering this intersection. Since both Konstantinovka and Vodyana and Uglidar and Bogoyavlenka, Yekaterinovka and Antonovka, and Elizavetovka and Ilyinka, this whole triangle will turn out to be, well, just as much as possible at high risks of a complete fall. Then we are moving with you Staromersko Harvest. There are no changes here. Just a couple of posts that Russian units continue to develop the offensive. At the moment, according to the posts, as far as it is clear, there is a concentration of attacks on this network at strong points. There is one large, two small, and a forest belt. That is, now I understand that Russian units are storming this very moment in the direction of the settlement of Rovnopol. There are no changes in the work direction. Of interest, it is worth noting the second blow, a repeated blow to the new Zaporozhye settlement. In these frames, we can observe with you the arrivals of the FABs of the 250s, blows, explosions, detonation. And this is not the first blow to this warehouse in the last few days. Since the beginning of June, these are the second shots, the second geolocation of strikes on this area. If we increase the number of updates from the 6th of June, or rather from the 6th, let's start from the first day. Then we see that this is the 7th day for us. This is today. Here. This one. It was on the 4th of June that the footage of the arrival of the FABs was also published in the same warehouse. In other words, I understand that it is from these borders, from this position, that, let's say, the transportation and maintenance and reinforcement of the grouping to the USU located in the village of Guliapol is going on. Very interesting shots, and perhaps the Russian command really has some plans in this regard. There are no important news in the work direction. And it is interesting to pay attention to the intensification of hostilities along the line of Foal's pubic 5-year-olds. In these frames, we can observe with you how Russian units are, let's say, firing very seriously at the positions of the Afu to the north. Already with the use of heavy equipment, and perhaps in the near future there will be the first attempts to launch assault operations. I remind you that it is this forest belt that has been subjected to the greatest fire impact since the beginning of May. Please note that here, in fact, every square centimeter was hit by artillery, mortars, drones. And even several captured Ukrainian soldiers were reported. There is no more news on the Kherson direction. Work is underway with drones, combing the area.